When you walk away, the first thing that happens is not regret, it is shock. And that distinction matters. From a psychological perspective inspired by Carl Jung, the narcissistic personality is organized around control, reflection, and certainty. Your presence was never merely companionship, it was structure. You functioned as a stabilizing mirror that confirmed her identity, her desirability, and her perceived superiority. When you remove yourself, you don't just leave a relationship, you remove a pillar holding up her inner world. This is why the initial reaction is disbelief rather than sadness. The mind struggles to accept what the ego assumed was impossible. She may replay conversations, search for explanations, or feel an almost physical agitation. Not because she misses you emotionally, but because her expectation of predictability has been violated. Narcissism relies on continuity, on the belief that people remain available, responsive, and orbiting. Your departure introduces chaos where certainty once lived. In Jungian terms, this is the moment the persona cracks. The role she played, confident, untouchable, always in control, suddenly lacks an audience. Without external confirmation, the ego scrambles to restore balance. This can appear as anger, dismissal, or forced indifference. But beneath these reactions is a quieter truth. The shock comes from realizing she could not prevent you from choosing yourself. What makes this stage so destabilizing is that it cannot be solved through manipulation alone. Silence offers no leverage. Absence provides no emotional feedback. For the first time, she is confronted with a boundary she did not set and cannot breach. This is deeply unsettling for a personality that equates control with safety. Importantly, this stage is not about insight or growth. It is about rupture, a psychological interruption that forces awareness, even if only briefly, that power was never inherent, it was borrowed. Borrowed from your attention, your tolerance, your willingness to stay. And this is where your role becomes clear. By walking away without explanation, justification, or emotional residue, you initiate a process she cannot stop. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need closure. The shock itself is the message. Because when someone loses control the moment you leave, it reveals a simple truth worth remembering. Your absence was never insignificant. It was the foundation. After the initial shock fades, something more painful takes its place, an ego wound. This is where the experience deepens, because now the narcissistic woman is no longer reacting to the loss of control, but to the injury of self-image. In the psychological framework associated with Carl Jung, the ego depends on reinforcement. It must be reflected back to itself through admiration, attention, and emotional pursuit. When that reflection disappears, the ego does not simply feel disappointed. It feels threatened. This is not regret in the moral sense. It is not sorrow for how she treated you, nor empathy for what you endured. It is the pain of no longer being central. Your absence forces a realization she cannot easily escape. She was not chosen, not prioritized, not chased. And for someone whose identity is built on being desired, this realization cuts deeply. At this stage, she may appear calm on the surface, even dismissive. She might tell herself and others that you were replaceable, insignificant, or emotionally weak. But these narratives are not strength, they are anesthetics. They exist to dull the ache of a wounded ego that can no longer draw reassurance from you. The more she repeats them, the clearer it becomes that something inside has been destabilized. What makes this wound so profound is that it cannot be healed internally. Narcissism lacks the capacity for self-generated worth. It must be supplied from the outside. And now the source is gone. This creates a quiet desperation, not always visible, but persistent. She may begin scanning for substitutes, attention, or validation, not to connect, but to repair the injury your departure exposed. From a philosophical standpoint, this is the moment where illusion meets reality. The illusion was that she was inherently superior, self-sufficient, untouchable. The reality is that her sense of value depended on someone staying. You. And when you walked away, the wound was not just emotional. It was existential. For you, this stage carries an important lesson. The pain you triggered was not cruelty, it was consequence. You did not wound her by leaving. You revealed a wound that already existed, and understanding that frees you from guilt, doubt, and the temptation to return. Because when your absence injures someone's ego, it confirms one essential truth. You were never powerless. You were the proof they needed to feel whole. Once the ego wound becomes too uncomfortable to sit with, the mind moves into self-protection. This is where reality begins to bend. In the psychological tradition associated with Carl Jung, this is a classic defense against the shadow, the parts of the self that threaten the carefully maintained image. Rather than integrating the loss, the narcissistic woman rewrites the story of what happened, not to understand it, but to survive it. In this phase, you are quietly reassigned a new role. You become the problem. Too sensitive, too weak, too intimidated by her strength. This narrative is not created out of malice. It is created out of necessity. Accepting that you left by choice would require confronting a painful truth, that her behavior, her dynamics, or her need for control played a role. And that kind of accountability would fracture the persona she depends on. Jung described the persona as the mask worn to face the world. When the mask is threatened, the psyche rushes to defend it. By reframing you as inferior or flawed, she restores a sense of superiority and regains psychological footing. On the surface, this may look like confidence. In reality, it is fear disguised as certainty. What's important to understand is that this rewritten story is fragile. It must be repeated, reinforced, and often shared with others. The more she speaks it, the more she needs it to be true. And yet, beneath the words, the discomfort remains. Because no narrative, no matter how polished, can fully erase the fact that you are gone, and that she did not control that ending. This is also why this stage often includes detachment without peace. She may appear indifferent, even relieved, but indifference that requires explanation is never genuine. True detachment is quiet. This version is loud because it is compensating for something unresolved. For you, this stage can be confusing. You may hear distortions of who you were, or feel tempted to defend yourself, to correct the record. But doing so only pulls you back into the narrative she needs to maintain. Silence, once again, is not weakness, it is clarity, because when someone has to rewrite history to protect their identity, it reveals a simple truth worth holding on to. Your departure didn't just end a relationship, it exposed a story that could only survive if you stayed silent and gone. After the story has been rewritten and repeated enough times to quiet the ego, a new discomfort begins to surface: comparison. This is where regret takes on a sharper edge. In the psychological view shaped by Carl Jung, the self is revealed not only through introspection, but through contrast. And now, whether she wants it or not, the narcissistic woman begins to measure herself against what she sees unfolding without her. This comparison does not always happen openly. Often it arrives quietly through glimpses and assumptions. She notices that you seem calmer, more focused, more grounded, or she imagines it, and imagination alone is enough. Because what matters is not whether you are thriving, but that you no longer appear diminished by her absence. This destabilizes the hierarchy she once relied on. The unspoken rule was that you needed her more than she needed you. Now that rule no longer holds. In Jungian terms, this is the moment the shadow grows louder. The parts of herself she avoided, envy, insecurity, dependency, begin to surface. You may dismiss these feelings as irritation or contempt, but underneath them is a painful recognition. Something in you activated growth, while something in her resisted it. And growth, once witnessed in another, becomes an accusation the ego cannot ignore. This stage is particularly unsettling because it undermines the illusion of uniqueness. Narcissism feeds on the belief of being exceptional, irreplaceable. But comparison introduces a disturbing possibility that others can offer what she once withheld, that you can receive elsewhere what she controlled. The loss becomes elational, rather than abstract. It is no longer just about you leaving, it is about what might now exist without her. For you, this phase carries quiet power. You don't need to display success or prove healing. Simply living without regression becomes the contrast. Your stability becomes the mirror she cannot shatter, because it reflects not her image, but her absence from your life. And this is where regret deepens, not because of love, but because of realization. She sees, perhaps for the first time, that what she dismissed as ordinary was the very presence that gave her significance. So take this with you as you move forward. When your peace becomes someone else's comparison, it confirms that growth is not loud, revenge is unnecessary, and the most powerful statement you can make is to continue becoming who you are without looking back. As comparison sharpens awareness, fear enters the picture. Not fear of loss in the romantic sense, but fear of erasure. This is the stage where the possibility of replacement becomes real. In the psychological lens often associated with Carl Jung, the ego does not merely seek connection, it seeks permanence. To be replaced is not just to lose someone, it is to lose meaning. And that is what now unsettles her. At this point, regret begins to feel urgent. The idea that you might form a bond elsewhere, one not shaped by control or imbalance, strikes at the core of narcissistic identity. What she fears most is not that you will love someone else, but that you will never need to look back. Because replacement implies continuity without her, and that challenges the fantasy that she was central, defining, unforgettable. This fear often activates behavior, sudden messages, subtle reminders, attempts to reappear emotionally or symbolically. These are not driven by reflection or remorse. They are driven by anxiety. The mind seeks to reinsert itself into a story it feels is moving on too quickly without its influence. Silence from you becomes threatening because silence confirms that you are no longer orbiting her emotional gravity. From a deeper psychological standpoint, this is about object constancy, the ability to maintain a stable sense of self when attachment figures are absent. Narcissism struggles here. Without reassurance, without confirmation of importance, the ego begins to fragment. The thought that someone else could now occupy the space she once controlled becomes intolerable. And so regret turns outward, disguised as curiosity, nostalgia, or concern. For you, this is a critical moment of clarity. This is where many people break no contact, misreading fear as love, urgency as sincerity. But what's being revealed is not transformation, it's dependency. Not on you as a person, but on the role you played in sustaining her identity. Understanding this allows you to respond not with anger or hope, but with discernment. You see the pattern without being pulled back into it. Recognize that true connection owes not panic at autonomy, and genuine care does not emerge only when it risks being replaced. So take this insight seriously as you move forward. When someone fears your replacement more than they valued your presence, it tells you everything you need to know. And the most powerful response is not reassurance. It is continuing to choose a life where you are not interchangeable, but finally irreplaceable to yourself. Eventually, when the urgency fades and the attempts lose momentum, something quieter sets in. This is the stage most people never witness, because it happens internally, away from performance and reaction. The narcissistic woman enters a silent reckoning, not dramatic, not confessional, but deeply unsettling. In the psychological understanding shaped by Carl Jung, this is the moment when the ego can no longer fully defend itself against what it knows. Here, superiority begins to collapse, not publicly, but privately. The realization emerges that the power she believed she possessed was conditional. It existed only as long as you remained emotionally accessible, responsive, and invested. Once you withdrew, the structure that supported her sense of dominance quietly eroded. This is not something she will easily articulate or even consciously accept, but it registers nonetheless. What makes this stage so profound is its loneliness. There is no one to blame convincingly, no narrative strong enough to fully suppress the truth, no replacement that quite restores the AM sense of control. The attention she may receive elsewhere lacks depth. It doesn't anchor her the way your presence once did. And that absence becomes a kind of echo, persistent, unavoidable. In Jungian terms, this is a confrontation with the shadow she avoided for years, dependency. The recognition that she was not as self-sufficient as she believed, that her sense of worth was externally sourced, that her authority was relational, not inherent. This realization doesn't lead to growth for most narcissistic personalities, but it does leave a mark. A subtle humility mixed with resentment, regret, and resignation. For you, this final stage offers closure without contact. You don't need acknowledgement or apology, because understanding replaces validation. You see now that what felt like imbalance was, in truth, inverted power. You were not clinging, you were holding something together, and when you let go, the truth revealed itself. This is why your silence matters. It allows the lesson to complete itself without interference. It ensures that the collapse of illusion is uninterrupted. And most importantly, it protects your own integration, the process of reclaiming your identity without distortion. So as you move forward, carry this with you. When someone's sense of superiority dissolves in your absence, it proves that your value was never in how much you endured, but in how much strength it took to walk away. And choosing yourself was not the end of the story. It was the moment the truth finally stood on its own.